Today's daf we're going to be learning is Gittin Daf Samach Zayin. We're going to start from a quick review from the beginning of the Gemara in yesterday's daf on Samech Vav Amud Bet. We had this whole question of Shmuel, where a get came to him, where the husband had said to two witnesses, write and give a get to my wife, but instead of them writing it, they actually gave it to someone else to write, to a sofer, to a scribe. And then eventually they figured out that what Shmuel's deliberation was. Right, Shmuel said the get's no good, and she got remarried, and she has to get divorced from her second husband. But I'm not really sure. It really needs further looking into. What was his deliberation? So eventually we say the deliberation must have been, he's not sure when husband says write a get, does he mean sign or does he mean write? If he means write, then it was no good because he wanted the witnesses to write it, and Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yossi that you can't pass on words. If you were commanded to do an action, right, it's not like someone handed you something physical and go do something physical, but words themselves can't be passed on to someone else. And this was just a command, go write and sign a get and give a get. So that can't be passed on. So therefore, the question is, what was his commandment? What did he tell them to do? Did he tell them to write or did he tell them to sign? So if he told them to write, it's clearly no good. If he told them to sign, then theoretically they could appoint a shaliach. But now there becomes this question. Does Rabbi Yossi, who says that mili lo mimserin l'shaliach, that you can't pass on commands to a messenger, does Rabbi Yossi though agree though if the husband were to say, tell a sofer to write and you sign, or in our case where he says you sign and give the get, but there is no written get, which is implicit that what he meant was, well, go find someone else to write it, or you can find someone else to write it. Does Rabbi Yossi actually think that's okay? In other words, our first running assumption is, yeah, sure, that's fine. Because especially if he said it, and even if he didn't say it, it's implied in what he said, that go find someone to write it, and, you do. So before we get into the Gemara and all the details, I want to just talk about, right, we quoted at the end of this Gemara here yesterday, was this Mishnah on Daf Pezayin, which talked about a sofer signing on the get with another witness. So I want to now that we're getting into this talk of a sofer, there's 4 possible cases here. Okay, and I'll preface it with the 4 cases. If you get the 4 cases straight, it'll make it a lot easier to understand the beginning of today's daf, which is a bit complicated. So the first case is where the husband himself goes to a sofer and to a witness, 2 people, and says, I want one of you to write it and sign it, and I want one of you to sign with him. Okay, that's a basic case, and that clearly is fine because the husband went directly and asked them to do it. However, when we had a case where a husband asked, case number 2 is a husband goes to a person and says, he says to him, I want you to find someone to write the get and sign with him. Okay, so the sofer, that would be a case of Omer Imru, which we started with yesterday, which is he said, go find someone. Okay, in this case, one of the people, right, the sofer, the one writing it and the one signing it, is found by a messenger. Okay. So that's case number 2. Case number 3, husband finds 2 witnesses and says to them that there's going to be a progression in all these cases of how removed the husband is from the picture, and also a little bit of difference about the sofer. The next case is the husband goes to 2 witnesses and says, listen, I want you guys to find a sofer. That's our classic imru. You find a sofer to write it, and you sign on the get. And then, and obviously in all these cases, the witnesses are supposed to bring it, or of those witnesses. Then he says, in the 4th case, I want you to find a sofer to write it, and I want you to find 2 witnesses to sign it. Okay? Where he says to even 2 witnesses there. Okay? I want you to find someone to write it, and I want you to find 2 witnesses. And then everybody who's dealing with the get, actually none of them heard from the husband directly. That's going to be the opposite extreme. So we started with the first case where everybody heard directly from the husband, both the sofer and the witness, and to the other extreme where neither the sofer nor the witnesses heard anything directly from the husband. And then we're going to see how there's an interplay between these cases and what the concerns are, that maybe there's something that might go wrong in one of those later cases, and maybe one of the earlier cases needs to be forbidden because of something that might go wrong in the later case. So let's start with Umi Mode Rabbi Yossi Bomer Imru. So again, the basis of Shmuel's deliberation is that Omer Imru would work even though Mili Lo Mimserin L'Shaliach, even though you can't have a Shaliach, you can't pass on shlichut that you're supposed to do yourself. if you were just commanded in words to do something. But if the husband said, go tell a sofer to write it, you could. Now, this seems pretty obvious that of course you could. What? The husband says, go tell a sofer, of course you could go find your own sofer. But we're going to see that perhaps there's a problem involved in that. And that's what we're going to bring up this Mishnah in Pezayin. Katav sofer ve'ed kasher. If you have a document signed by the sofer himself and another witness, it's okay. Written by a sofer with an aid, to which Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Hatam sofer ve'ed shaninu. In other words, it was signed, not that he just wrote it because then there was only one witness. It means that the sofer was signed on the document. And Amar of Chisda Manini Rabbi Yossi. Amar Mili lo mimserin l'shaliyach. Chisda says the Mishnah has to be Rabbi Yossi, who thinks that no one could have done this unless, and what he's going to basically say is, this is case one. Okay? This case is where the husband directly went to the sofer and to the witness and said, I want you to write it and sign, and I want you to sign with it. And Isal Gadata Mode Rabbi Yossi Bomer Imru, because if you think that this could be case number two, that he said to the witness, go find a sofer, have him write it and sign it with you, and you sign with him, and that would work, we would have a big problem, which is case number two should be forbidden. I'll already tell you outside before we see it inside, on account of case number four. Because of a problem that could happen in case number four, we should forbid Omer Imru in case number two as well. So what could that be? Nafik minech korva, what could happen bad? Because if you have this guy sign the sofer, and he never, and he wrote it and he signed it, and he never heard it directly from the husband, well, it could be that we'll have a problem with a similar case, which is, and it's not exactly similar because it's two away as we describe the cases, but if somebody says to two people, this is case four, Imru the sofer v'yichtov, u'leploni u'ploni v'yichtimu, go tell the sofer and he'll write it, and go tell ploni u'ploni and they'll sign it, which again means nobody dealing with it yet heard directly from the husband. Mishum kisufa de sofer, we might worry that they'll be a little embarrassed for the sofer, and haishe, right, they'll be concerned about kisufa, that's the embarrassment of the sofer, because they didn't hear it directly from the husband. They don't really know exactly what was supposed to happen. There's a little bit of a broken telephone. And they say, it's true, he wanted us to sign, but sure, he doesn't care if the sofer signs, and it'll be humiliating for the sofer to say, it's very nice you wrote this get, but we don't trust you to sign it, because signing is the really important part. So they might say, you know what, one of us will sign it, and the sofer will sign with us. And that's a problem, because Ba'alo Amar Hachi, that's not what the husband wanted. So we can't do that. So now, if you're Rabbi Yossi, or even anyone really, but we're saying Rabbi Yossi says that the sofer can be signed on it with another witness, that has to be in a case where it wasn't passed on to anybody else, where it wasn't indirect, where the aide was told, go find the sofer. Because in a case where the aide was told, go find the sofer, if we allow that case and the sofer to sign in that case, you might come in a different case to allow the sofer's signature when actually the sofer wasn't asked, like in the case 4. And that will be a problem. So therefore, it must be that the only way a sofer can ever sign, according to Rabbi Yossi, is when he was directly commanded by the husband to do it. Okay? So now, comes the Gemara and says, what do you mean? Why would you forbid case number 2? Because you might come to case number 4. Who's going to ever come to case number 4? Kevan Amar, we're going to see this later in the Daf, and only later in the Daf will explain why this is. Kasher v'lo taseh can be Israel. While that case might work, so if, in fact, if you tell a sofer, you tell a messenger, go find a sofer to write my get, find 2 witnesses to sign, or tell so-and-so and so-and-so to sign, and then they do exactly like he says, okay, not like we said, the messed up case, but if the sofer writes it and those 2 people he designated specifically sign, it's good. So it's kasher. But lo ta'aseh can be Israel, but don't do this. This is not a good way to do a get. And we'll talk about what the potential problem is. Besides the problem we just raised, there's another issue about doing this, that you shouldn't ever do it ideally. So if that's the case, lo shachiach, case number 4 becomes a very rare case. If it's a rare case, because nobody does it, right, unless someone goes against the law, well, you certainly don't need it for big case number 2, because you might end up with a problem in case number 4, which probably likely doesn't ever happen. So we've rejected that possibility. But now, which basically means that maybe Rabbi Yossi does say Omer Imru works. However, we're going to reject that now for another reason, because of case number 3. The problem we just raised could be a problem even in case number 3. Maybe he said to 2 people, tell the sofer to write the get. And you sign. Now, even though they heard it directly from the husband, still they could think, they still could be worried that maybe the sofer will be embarrassed and it'll be hard for them to go sign in front of the sofer. And they'll say to the sofer, you know what, you sign instead. And then, and again, what's the problem with these cases? The problem really is that they'll go deliver the get thinking it's fine to the wife, and the husband finds out years later that the get wasn't done the way he wanted, and he comes and says to the woman, you know what, this isn't a get, and she's married with kids, has a whole new family, and he ruins the entire family. They all become unsaved. So we definitely want to avoid this situation. So therefore, because of case number 3, where we're worried a sofer is going to sign, we basically don't allow a sofer to sign. We're back to square one, unless the sofer was told directly to do it. So that means even if the husband says you can tell the sofer to write and sign it, we don't allow that. So now you see, but Omer Imru, right, when he said tell the sofer to do it, it doesn't work. So then they say, now we're going to see. There's a debate about case number 3, whether you can even do this ideally. So some people say, if you say it's okay, it works, but you shouldn't do this, well, then it makes perfect sense again. Then we're okay, because case number 2 actually will be allowed, because we're not worried you'll get to case number 3, because case number 3 is also not permitted, ideally. But we're going to see later that there's a whole slew of people who think it's actually okay. You can do case number 3. Then we have a problem. Okay? And then it seems like Rabbi Yossi doesn't think necessarily, anyway, depending on the way some people understand him. Some people will say that Rabbi Yossi doesn't say Omer Imru works. Okay? So that means that if the husband, the only way the sofer can write a get is if the husband tells the sofer directly to write the get, or also to sign it, right? It doesn't matter, write or sign. In both these cases, the husband told him, and yet it wasn't allowed for him to do. So now, Ella, how do we explain this then? Because now Shmuel's deliberation is irrelevant. Because no matter what, you can't tell the sofer, even if it's like Omer Imru, or even if he even said Imru, it would be a problem, right? Go tell a sofer to write. So I'm Rabbi Yossi, Tarite. Rabbi Yossi really said both those things. Number 1, Milu L'Mimsur L'Shaliach, meaning you can't pass on a verbal directive to someone else. Number 2, he holds, or possibly holds anyway, at least 50% of the people, let's say, hold that he holds. Amar Imru doesn't work. Okay, even if the husband said you could tell him, you can't. The husband has to directly hire the sofer, find the sofer. But Shmuel, but our deal is Shmuel, not Rabbi Yossi. The fact that Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yossi about Mili L'Mimsur and L'Shaliach, directives, right, don't get passed down from one messenger to the other. But it doesn't mean he holds the same thing about Omer Imru. It could be that he holds against Rabbi Yossi about that element and thinks that if the husband said, go tell a sofer, that you actually could tell a sofer. So that's how we finally resolve our complicated question. I had a lot of different parts to it, but in the end, we resolve it in that way. Gufa. Now we're going to go in depth into something we saw before. It's pretty simple. Amar Shmuel Amar Rebbe, Halakha keRabbi Yossi da'amar Mili L'Mimsur L'Shaliach. So Shmuel said in the name of Rebbe that we pass like Rabbi Yossi, who says Mili L'Mimsur L'Shaliach. That was what we saw earlier on yesterday's daf. So Amar L'Fanav Rabbi Shimon Rebbe. Rabbi Shimon the son of Rebbe said, Me'achar sheRabbi Meir b'Chanina Isha. Oh no, Cholkim Rabbi Yossi ma ra'a Rebbe lomar halakha keRabbi Yossi. Since Rabbi Meir and Chanina Ish Ono in the Mishnah both disagree with Rabbi Yossi, why did Shmuel, or why did Rebbe think to hold like Rabbi Yossi? Amar lo, shtok b'ni shtok. So Rebbe says, silence, my son, be silenced. Lo ra'ita et Rabbi Yossi. You never saw Rabbi Yossi. Ilmale ri'ito mimukoimo. If you had seen him, you would have known that we hold like him because he always gives a good explanation of his opinion. Okay, he explains how he gets to there, and that's a very important element. How do we know this? Titania, there's a brighter that talks about this. Isi ben Yehuda hayamoneh shibchan shel chachamim. Isi ben Yehuda would praise all these different rabbis each had something unique about them. And we'll go through, I'll already tell you there's different explanations about what the meaning of them are. We'll go often with Rashi in terms of his explanation. Rabbi Meir Chacham v'Sofer. He's not only a Chacham, he's also a Sofer. We've seen before that he was a Sofer. And it meant also that he was very particular. He knew all the letters and whether a word has a Vav or a Yud, and that's always open to Drasha and all that. And he was very meticulous, you could say. Rabbi Yehuda Chacham l'Chashir said, this is a very funny one. Sounds like when he wanted to be, when he applied himself, he was wise. Some people say it just means that he was really always smart. But when he applied himself, he was actually able to win out over Rabbi Meir. That's a possible explanation, which sounds a little better than just saying, well, right, it's like your report card when the teacher says, well, he could be applying himself a lot better, or she could be really doing much better, right? It means you have a lot of potential, but you're not fulfilling your potential. So it's hard to say that really they said that about Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. Next. Rabbi Tarfon Gal Shel Egozim. He's a pile of nuts. Okay, that sounds a little bit weird, but what does it mean? Rashi says when you pull one out, everything falls down, which means in a good way, which is when you ask him a question and pull something out of him, all of a sudden everything comes down with it. He has Mishnah, Gemara, Breita, this, that, everything comes in. Rabbi Yishmael Chanut Miyuzenet. It's a well-stocked store. Store has everything right there. So you ask him a question, everything is just at his disposal. Oh yeah, you need that? Yeah, I know that source. Oh yeah, I know that. Rabbi Akiva Otsar Balum. This is a storage house. It's a full storage house. He seems to have everything well organized into parts, right? There's Mishnahs here, there's Breitas there, there's Gemaras there. Again, there weren't Gemaras there, but in other words, all these type of drasha were organized there. He was very organized, but what he had, that's one possible explanation, or just he had a lot in store, right? Everything was stored well. Maybe it meant he had a good memory. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Kupata Rochli. These are peddlers. Now peddlers come and they seem to have everything you want. So again, you ask them a question, you can find what it is you're looking for. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Kupashal B'Samim. Samim also, when you come around with Samim, you're also a peddler, but you have a little less than the Rochlim who have all sorts of things. You only carry B'Samim, but I guess what he knew well. Mishnat Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki. This is quoted a number of times in Shas. He didn't say a lot, but what he said was very clean. It was perfectly figured out. He understood it very well, which is why we usually hold by him when he does come up. Rabbi Yossi Nimukoimo, that's the one we were looking for. Okay, he brings his explanations with him, so he explains himself very well. Rabbi Shimon Tochen Harbe Motzi Kima. He grinds a lot, but only takes out a little. This sounds pretty negative, kind of like the Rabbi Yehuda one, but the Gemara is going to explain now, Tana, a different way of understanding this, which isn't like he works hard, but only really a little bit gets, we hold like him. But you could explain it, Mishakach Kima. Umasha Motzi, this is a Breita, that he's Mishakach Kima, he only forgets a little bit. That's what's Motzi Kima means what falls is only a little bit, meaning he remembers everything he learns. Umasha Motzi, and whatever does drop out, Eno Motzi ala Subin. It's really like the force, the non-important stuff, the bran that comes out. Right? This is all, the Kavanaki is also a reference to fine flour. And this is also a flour reference, that the Subin are the bad things. Right, nowadays, whole wheat is more expensive. In those days, whole wheat was cheaper. It was the bad, not refined flour. Banai shnu midotai, you should learn what I teach you. Shemidotai trumot midotav shel Rabbi Akiva. I'm a student of Rabbi Akiva, and I picked out the best of his stuff, so you should go with what I say. Gufa. Okay, now we're going back to something else that we said before. Amar l'shnayim imru l'safer v'yatov l'ploni v'yachtemlu. Amar Rav Huna amarav kashel v'lo taseh b'Yisrael. So now we're going to try to explain why case number 4 should not be done. Okay, this is the case where all the witnesses and the sofer, none of them heard the imperative directly from the husband. It was that he told the messenger to appoint them all. Either Ula said to Rav Nachman or Rav Nachman said to Ula, if it's all good, then why can't you do this? We're worried that maybe she'll hire witnesses, meaning maybe the woman will hire 2 guys to just lie. First of all, they don't have to go under oath in court. All they have to do, she hires some people. They go to tell people, oh yeah, the husband told me you should write the get. The husband told me you should get the get. And you can imagine a woman who's an aguna is desperate to get a get. You could see why she would be motivated to do this kind of thing. And basically, therefore, you have to worry if nobody who's involved here heard it directly from the husband, maybe it's made up. So that's why you shouldn't do this, because it will allow for women to abuse the system and basically find two witnesses to just lie and give her a get, and then she'll go to court and pull out her get, and she'll be divorced. And then, first of all, it will mess her up in the end, because the husband will come later and say, hey, you're not divorced. But besides that, it's also just, lying. So now the Gemara says, we don't worry. Once you have two witnesses, right? That's how we establish things. Facts on the ground. If we have two edim signed on a document, on a sale, or signed on a get of a woman, the rabbis aren't worried that it's forgery and that maybe they were hired to do that. So they say, well, let's distinguish those cases from this case. They might not sign on a document, but dibura kamre. But here all they have to do is go say to someone, go write a get, go sign a get. That is much easier, much more likely somebody might be willing to lie in that way rather than sign on a document, which is much more formal. Okay, next. Amar l'shnayim, imru l'sofer v'yichtov v'atem chatom. So if he says to two people, tell the sofer to write, and you sign. Rav Chisda, this is what we saw before. This was case number 3. We said already that some people said you can't do this, and some people said you can do it. So now we're going to have a list, just a big list of, he said this, he said that, he said this, he said that, he said this, he said that. Rav Chisda amar kasher v'lo taseh. It's valid, but you shouldn't do it. Rabba bar Chana amar kasher v'taseh. Rav Nachman amar kasher v'lo taseh. Rav Sheshet amar kasher v'taseh. Okay, so Rav Chisda says don't do it. Rabba bar Chana says yes, do it. Rav Nachman says yes, do it. Don't do it. Rav Sheshet says do it. Rabba amar kasher v'lo taseh. Rav Yosef amar kasher v'taseh. These are pairs of rabbis who often disagree with each other. Remember, Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshet, we're going to get to them back at the end of today's daf. And Rav and Rav Yosef also we see arguing a lot. Turning now to Amud Bet, the Ika de Apichlu. Some people say it's the opposite. Rashi says specifically we're talking about Rabbi and Rav Yosef. The Rabbi said don't do it. Rav Yosef said you can do it. And some people say it's the opposite. The Rabbi said you can, and Rav Yosef said you can't. Amar la kitvu get. Now we're back to the Mishnah where there was a difference between if you tell 10 people or you say to the 10 people, all of you. If you say all of you, you need them all to sign the get. If you say 10 of you, write and give a get to my wife, one of them writes, 2 of them sign. So Tanu Rabbanan, now there's a bright Tavis. Amar la sarat kitvu get utnu lishti. Write a get and give to my wife. Echad kotev al yidei kulam. So one writes on behalf of all of them. It's only one really needs to do the right. Kulchem ktovu, but if you say all of you write, echad kotev b'mamad kulam. One has to write in front of all 10. They can't all 10 write, but one writes in front of all 10. The same thing with holichu get lishti, taking the get to my wife. Echad molicha yidei kulam. One does it on behalf of all of them. One brings it while all the others are watching. But now they ask a question. What if he counts them? What if he says, instead of kulchem, he doesn't say all of you. He doesn't just say to them randomly, do it. But he says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Write a get to my wife. What did he mean? Rav Huna amar mana eno kulchem. This is not the same as kulchem, so they don't all have to. Rabbi Yochanan amar mishum Rabbi Elazar demin Roma amar manehu areu kulchem. Rabbi Yochanan, quoting the name of Rabbi Elazar from Roma, says it is like kulchem. Amar Papa velo pligi. Rav Papa says there's actually really no machloket here. They're each just talking about a different situation of counting. It depends whether you counted all the 10 people or you counted only some. Now, which way does it go? Good question. There's different people who explain it in different ways. Some people say if you said to all 10 and you counted up to the number 10, it's the same as kulchem. That seems the more obvious. And if you only got up to 5, let's say, then you obviously didn't mean all of them. And therefore, just one can do it. Some people say it's the opposite. If you counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you specifically meant you wanted those people. But if you got all up to 10, you were just saying, identifying kind of who you were talking to, but not necessarily that you wanted them all to do it. Okay. Now, Itkin Rav Yehuda Begita de Kulchem. Because of this problem of Kulchem and that you needed them all to do it, and that was sometimes complicated. So Rav Yehuda made a takana and said, if you say Kulchem, you have to say Kulchem, Ktovu o Kulchem, o Kolcha v'chad minachon. You have to specify and say, listen, you could either all sign or just one of you. Okay, or any one of you is what I mean, because it obviously has to be 2. Or, the writing could be just one of you. Sorry, my mistake. Either all of you or one of you. Hatomu o kulchen o kol tcheminchon. sign either all of you or two from among you. Ovilu o kulchem, ovilu, pass on, bring the get to my wife, either all of you or each one, only one of you. Okay, so he has to specify all that. Now you can already see, even by my reading it, it's a bit of a mouthful. And Rava says, he says, what kind of crazy takana is this? Zimnin, the guys like the Dibure. We have this in the beginning of the second. Why didn't they say all that? Because you might cut off some words and then you won't have it the way it was supposed to be done, and then we'll have a problem with the get. So sometimes people cut off their words, and then you're going to end up with what? You might say all of you, and then forget the end of the sentence and say, or any one of you. You might skip that part, and that's the important part. And then you'll have a problem. Because you kind of think you were doing with the Takana of Rabbi Yehuda, and then you really weren't. So El Amarava, Rabbi says, let's just keep it simple. You have to say, any one of you can write. Any two of you can sign. And Ovilu and as long as one of you writes, brings it there, it's fine. Hadran alacha omer, and with that we'll finish the chapter. Okay, let's do a review of the end of this daf so far before we get to the new chapter. We started with trying to figure out Shmuel's deliberation. Even if he says tovu means to sign, what happened with the writing? How could they still have a sofer write? The husband didn't tell them they could appoint a messenger to write. Maybe the husband himself has to find the sofer to write. And isn't it true that Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold that even in Imru, even if he tells them to get a sofer, they still can't do it? Well, we deliberated whether Rabbi Yossi really holds that or not, but in the end we said it's possible he really does hold that Imru doesn't work. But in the end we say Shmuel obviously doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi on that issue, even though he holds like him on the other issue. From there we went to, why do we paskin like Rabbi Yossi in the issue of Milei lo mimser in l'shaliach, that the verbal directives can't be passed on to a messenger when it goes against Rabbi Meir and the testimony of Hanina Ish Ono in the name of Rabbi Akiva. And that's because we said his Rabbi Yossi, we hold like him a lot because Nimu Koimo, because he brings his explanation with him, and that was in comparison to all the other rabbis and all the great features of all these rabbis. Then we got to the issue of why those earlier cases, number 3 and 4, why there's a debate about some of them and it's clear about the other, that you shouldn't be doing this, right? We're worried really that the woman is going to produce her own witnesses that lie and tell people to write, and that's why there has to be a direct connection between the husband and the witnesses. By the way, I forgot to mention, this is why it's good we do review. Why is there a machloket about case number 3? Probably there's a machloket about case number 3 because they say if we allow case number 3, you might come to allow case number 4. So that's probably why the people who said you shouldn't do case number 3 either, even though the witnesses who were signing did hear directly from the husband. But if you allow that, you might come to allow the case where the witnesses can also appoint other witnesses. Then we got to the case of the 10 people, and we talked about different languages and what would count as kulchem, what would be like, what if you count them one by one, is that? And then we talked about the takana of Rabbi Yehuda and then the fixing of it by Rava of how to avoid problems of kulchem. Okay, with that, we're going to start the new chapter. Misha chazo cordiacus. Okay, now we have someone who gets sick with cordiacus. See what that is in a minute, but it seems like some disease that basically makes you a little bit insane and your brain doesn't function properly, and therefore we don't really trust you. So if you have cordiacus and you say, kitvu get lishti, right, to get to my wife, lo amar klum, we don't accept this. Amar kitvu get lishti, what if you said it first, right, to get to my wife, va'achazo cordiacus, and then you got sick with this cordiacus, and then chazar va'amar lo techtevenu, and then you said, don't write it, ein dvarav ha'achronim klum. Okay, what you said in the end when you had cordiacus doesn't really count. Now, I'll already read Rashi. Your cordiacus says it's shem shida hasholetet kishishotet yain harbe migito. Okay, it's a disease that happens. Rashi calls it a shade. Okay, it's an evil spirit that attacks you, kind of gets into your body when you drink a lot of fresh wine that hasn't fermented yet. Okay, now you drink it straight from the gut, straight from the wine press. We're going to talk all about evil spirits and also remedies for evil spirits and remedies for diseases. Now, diseases and evil spirits often kind of get intertwined, and it's possible evil spirits, really people believed in evil spirits, and that's one way of understanding them, that they really believe there were evil spirits and maybe there really are evil spirits. The other approach is the rationalist approach, to say these aren't really evil spirits, these are just ways they called things evil spirits when they really were diseases, okay, or dangers or psychological issues and things like that. So we can understand that way. The other thing to know is we're going to talk about all sorts of remedies, and many poskim say we don't, even though the Gemara brings remedies, which number one shows the rabbis really viewed themselves as healthcare professionals and psychiatrists and psychologists and all of that. But we don't necessarily hold like them the halacha. In fact, many people say we don't hold by the remedies mentioned in the Gemara. Some of them you'll see are quite strange. Some of them are actually not so strange at all. And we're going to start a whole bunch of dapim of all sorts of remedies. Now, nishtatek. What if somebody stopped being able to speak? V'amrulo, nichtov get lishtachan. They say, should we write a get to your wife? V'hirkin b'rosho, and he shook his head yes. But kimatosh l'shapamim. We check him 3 times. Im amar lav al hein hein. If every time you ask him a question, he answers yes to a yes question and no to a no question, hare elu yichtavu v'yitnu. You can assume that he meant yes, write the get and give it. My cordiacus. So what is cordiacus? Amar Shmuel denaftecha merchadet ha'dematzarta. That you got this bug, this sickness from drinking fresh wine from the wine press. Belidi mishin nishacho yain chadash. So why not just say the one who gets hit by, sick by drinking new wine? Hakamash malan dahai rucha. And here we know why Rashi said it was an evil spirit, because the Gemara says it. It's to tell you that evil spirit that attacks you when you drink this new wine, cordiacus shma. That's its name. To which they say, L'may nafkamina, why do we need to know its name? L'kamea, well, for kameot, okay, for amulets that they used, you need to know what right? This is like nowadays. You want a diagnosis, so you know exactly, right? If you have a certain type of disease, so you'll have a certain type of they'll give you a certain type of drug for it, or they'll give a certain type of whatever it might be. So each disease has its own name. This is also, you want to call it by name so that we know how to rectify the situation. Maya sute, what's the cure? Bisra sumaka agomre v'chamra marka, lean red meat on coals and very diluted wine. Amar Abaye, Amar Li'ain, my mother told me, which is not his mother, but the woman who took care of him, and it was like his mother. L'shim shabat yom, if you have a day-old fever, kuza demaya, drink a jug of water. This is why I said some of these are reasonable. Drink a ton of water. That's what we always say. Drink plenty of fluids. Batre yome, if you're sick for 2 days with fever, sikure, bloodletting. That was something that was very popular then. We don't really do anymore. Batalta yoma, 3-day-old fever. Bisra sumaka agomre v'chamra marka. The same thing that you have for the cordiacus, which is have lean red meat on coals with very diluted wine. L'shimsha atikta, if you have a very long fever, lete tarnigolata ukamta. This is the weird one. Take a black roost hen. V'likare shtiva erev. Cut it crosswise and lengthwise, widthwise and lengthwise. V'ligache l'mitziata dereisha. Shave off the top of the sick person's head. V'lotve ilave. Put it on top of their head. The hen. V'nagche ilave ad misrach. Leave it there until it sticks. Just from the blood and stuff. I know it sounds pretty gross. Then go into the water up to your neck until the world starts spinning, like you start feeling really sick. Then you go into the water, submerge yourself, come out and sit, and that should help you. V'ilo, and if it doesn't, meaning if you don't want to use that remedy, or maybe if it doesn't work, eat a lot of leeks. Then go into the water to your neck until you're very weak. And then submerge, come out, and sit. L'shimsha, for general fever, Mr. Sumaka agomre v'chamar marka. This seems to be a repeat, but I guess they're trying to say if you're very hot, this is what you should do. Ulitalga, if you're very cold, the opposite. Bisra shamena agomre v'chamar chaya. Instead of the red lean meat, take red fat meat, put it on coals, and use non-diluted wine as opposed to before it was very diluted wine. Rav Amram Chasida, okay, he was a Hasid, which meant he was like an ascetic. And the people in the Reish Galuta's house, which were the opposite of ascetics, it was all about food and banquets and all that. We're going to see that soon. They didn't like him because he was also telling them, oh, you should be more strict, blah, blah, blah. They didn't like him. So the people of the Reish Galuta wanted to torture him a little bit. They were being mean to him. So they didn't like what he was doing, what he was telling them. They would put him on the snow, okay, or leave him out in the freezing cold weather. L'machar amrule, the next day, he would say to them, they would say to him, what would you like us to bring you? After they torture him, they now kind of act like they're being nice, but he was very smart, and he said, Amar, anything I tell them, they're going to bring me the opposite. So what did he say? Amar lahu, Bisra sumaka agomre v'chamra marka. Take red, I need red lean meat with very diluted wine, which is good for if you're hot, but not if you're cold. If you're cold, it's the opposite. And in fact, he was right. So they brought him the exact opposite, the fat meat on the coals with the undiluted wine, which is exactly what he wanted. He got what he wanted. So it reminds me of the story with the woman and the lentils, and every time he asked for something, she brought him the other thing. They were having this problem of communication, and then the husband started telling them the opposite. He tried to intervene. Anyway, if you remember that story, this sounds kind of similar. Shama Yalta, all of a sudden we get to Yalta. It was Yalta. She was the daughter of the Reish Galuta. The Reish Galuta is the exilarch, like I said, very wealthy. She was married to Rav Nachman, and because of that, Rav Nachman was the rabbi, or maybe that's how they got married in the first place, but Rav Nachman was the rabbi of the Reish Galuta. We see this also in lots of stories. Particularly, I told you before to pay attention, Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshet were listed before as a pair that disagreed. They often disagree. We're going to see a story soon of Rav Sheshet and the Reish Galuta. And Rav Sheshet often gets into altercations with the Reish Galuta's people, or his people get into altercations. There was a famous story with the Lechi in Eruvin about this fight that happened between them. They tore down the Lechi. They had a different opinion about the whole Lechi thing. And then the thugs of the Reish Galuta tried beating up Rav Sheshet's guys. And then said, "What are you doing? These are Rav Sheshet, right? I told them to do this." And I said, "Oh, sorry, because you're a rabbi." But still, they didn't have the simplest relationship. Rav Sheshet was definitely very negative about the Reish Galuta's people, which we're going to see from our story today. But before we get there, we're going to have Yalta. Yalta is the famous Yalta who's married to Rav Nachman. She's the one who breaks all the barrels of wine, and she's a very strong-minded woman. She obviously was not being mean to him as the Reish Galuta's people were. And she hears, she brings him into the Beit Merchatz. Presumably what happened was, after he ate this meat, then his body got hot and he needed to cool down. So she brings him into the bathhouse. She puts him into the water in the bathhouse until the water turns red like blood. Okay, basically it took the heat out of his body then. I don't really know the significance of this, but he ended up with these little spots on his body that look like coins. Rav Yosef, when he was very cold, like story before of Rav Amram, he would work with the millstone. Rav Sheshet, he would carry heavy beams. Both of them understood what we understand nowadays, that the more, I'm sure they understood then too, which you see here, the more you physically move your body, it warms up your body. So they both got involved in physical activities to warm their body up. Now we get to this story with the Reish Galuta and Rav Sheshet, which will only start today and continue tomorrow. Amar the Reish Galuta the Rav Sheshet, my time alo sayid margaban. Why won't you eat with us? Right? Remember, the banquets and their big meals were always so important. Why? Right? It's very insulting that you won't eat in our house. Amar le diloma alu avde. Your slaves, your servants aren't very careful about kashrus. I don't trust your kashrus, basically. They're suspect that they take live limbs, they take out limbs from live animals rather than slaughtering them. Amar le miyem, he says, who told you this? And how can you, I don't know of this. Amar le hashta machminala. He says, I'll show you right now. Amar le l'shami. He says to his shamash. Okay, you have to remember that Rav Sheshet was blind, which is very interesting in light of this entire story. Go steal for me a limb of one of the legs of one of the animals, a thigh. So he brings it to him. Amar lahu admuli hadme dechayuta. So then he asked them to bring an animal before him, right? Food. So they bring out an animal with 3 legs on it. One was missing. Now remember, he couldn't see, but he knew that this was what the story. Amar lahu habalat shalosh raglayim habai. What? You have an animal with 3 legs only? Where's the 4th leg? Sok aitu chadame alma. So they go inside and they find a limb. Where did they find a limb? They obviously pulled it off of a live animal. Okay, why they didn't have some other animal they could have pulled it off, we don't know, but it seems pretty clear here they took it from a live animal. Otivu kame. So they bring it before him. Amar le shame. He says to Shamash, servant, otve nami lahaftida. Go pull out yours now. Put it on the table. Otva. He puts it on the table. Amar lehu. Rav Sheshet now says, habat chamesh raglayim habai. What? You have animals that have 5 legs, right? Obviously showing, look what you did. So the Reish Galuta is convinced. Amar le ihachi le'abdu kamei shame demar v'lecho. He says, okay, why don't you just bring your shamash into the kitchen, have him watch everything, make sure there's, as we call hashgacha, and it'll be resolved, and then you can eat with us. Amar le l'chai. He says, okay, fine. Krivu tacha kamayu. They table before him. Aitu kame bisra, they give him some meat. Otive kame ristana dechanka chamta. They bring him meat with a bone in it that could choke him. Now they probably figured he won't see, but he was smart, he was blind, so he felt and he realized there was a bone in there that was about to choke him. It was gonna kill him, right? So gashashe, that's what we see. He was touching it to feel, to make sure. V'shakle karcha b'sudre. And he takes the whole piece of meat, not even just the bone. He puts the whole piece of meat, wraps it in his napkin so that later he can prove, look, they're trying to kill me. Okay, what's going to happen in the story? We'll have to see. Okay, so after they finish eating, we're going to see what happens and how the story continues. So interesting story. We're going to continue it tomorrow. So starting from this chapter, just quick review. We have the case of the Kortayakos. And when someone's in that stage, they can't give a get and they can't cancel a get when they're in that stage. Someone doesn't speak. What do? We have him shake his head, yes or no. And then we went into all these things about what is Kortayakos, how do you fix it, how do you rectify it? And then we went into how do you rectify all sorts of other ailments. From there, we got to the story of the Reish Galuta of Rav Amram, how they put him in the freezing cold. And from there, we got to the story of Rav Sheshet with the Reish Galuta and showing kind of how bad the Reish Galuta's house was and the people and showing it in a very, very bad light. Even though other sugyas maybe show it more positively, this one clearly shows that they were difficult, complicated people. With that, we'll finish today's daf. Have a great day, everyone.